Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the surface of a perfect life? What if the world you knew, a world of comfort and ease, was merely a beautiful illusion? This is the story of a young man who believed life was simple, a gift to be enjoyed without a second thought. In my youth, the concept of struggle was entirely foreign to me. My existence was cushioned by my father's fortune, a buffer against any and all worries. The need to study, the imperative to work, these were abstract ideas, applicable to others, but certainly not to me. I possessed everything I could ever desire. A fleeting glimpse of something beautiful in a shop window was all it took. A quiet word to my father, and it was mine. My friends, perhaps with more foresight than I, would occasionally suggest I plan for the future, but their words were met with my laughter. Why should I toil? Why should I harbor anxiety? My father's wealth was a fortress, and I felt utterly secure within its walls. My days unfolded in a predictable, luxurious rhythm. I would awaken late, my breakfast served to me in bed as I idly watched television. Hours would drift by before I might venture out with friends. Our destinations always the finest restaurants, our attire the most expensive brands, our vehicles sleek and fast. Life was a grand, effortless party, and I was convinced the music would never stop. I never contemplated the source of the money I so freely spent. I never considered the nature of work. If a whim to travel struck me, I would travel. If I desired new shoes, I would purchase them without a thought. A new phone meant acquiring the latest and most advanced model. My father, the silent benefactor, footed every bill. It never once occurred to me to consider the immense effort he expended, the sheer weight of the business he managed. I was content to float on the surface of my life, absorbed only in the pleasures of the present, blissfully ignorant of any tomorrow. But one day, the familiar rhythm was broken. My father summoned me. His expression was unusually grave, devoid of its usual warmth. He instructed me to sit, his voice low and serious. "Son," he began, "we need to talk." I offered a casual smile, expecting a simple conversation. "Yes, father?" But his face remained a mask of solemnity. He wasn't joking. He wasn't pleased. A faint tremor of nervousness fluttered within me. A feeling so unfamiliar, I didn't recognize it. My father had always been the embodiment of kindness, the man who never refused me anything. But on that day, the atmosphere was profoundly different. He drew a long, deep breath, his eyes fixed on mine. "You are not a child anymore," he said, each word landing with deliberate weight. "You must start thinking about your future." I chuckled, attempting to dismiss the gravity of the moment. "Father, I have everything I could possibly need." He slowly shook his head, a look of disappointment in his eyes. "No, my son, you have everything because I work tirelessly. But life is not a constant. One day, things may change." I couldn't grasp his meaning. It seemed to me he was creating worry out of thin air. "Don't worry, father," I reassured him with a smile. Nothing will ever change." He didn't return the smile. His gaze remained steady, penetrating. After a long moment, he simply said, "We will see." I didn't understand the cryptic warning. I attributed it to a passing bad mood. I rose, left the room, and immediately pushed his words from my mind. I rejoined my friends, immersing myself once more in laughter and spending. I was completely unaware that the very foundations of my world were about to shift. The following morning began like any other. I woke late, stretched languidly, and reached for my phone. It was flooded with messages from friends, all eager to make plans. A smile touched my lips as I prepared for the day, selecting my finest clothes, applying an expensive perfume. But as I descended the stairs and entered the living room, I found my father waiting. He stood there, his face just as serious as the day before. "Sit down," he commanded. I sighed, a flicker of annoyance rising. "Father, I have plans," I protested. He was unmoved. His eyes bored into mine. "You are not a boy anymore," he repeated, his tone firm. "You must learn about life." I rolled my eyes in exasperation. "Father, I know about life," I retorted. He shook his head again. "No," he said softly, "you do not." Then he uttered a strange command. "Come with me." Puzzled, I followed him outside to his car. I had no idea of our destination. He offered no explanation. As I sat beside him in the passenger seat, a cloud of confusion enveloped me. He started the engine, and we drove into a version of the city I had never truly seen. That morning, the streets seemed alive with a different kind of energy. I saw people walking with urgent purpose, sanitation workers diligently cleaning the streets, vendors selling food from carts on the roadside. These were scenes I had driven past 1,000 times, yet I had never truly looked at them before. After some time, my father brought the car to a halt. In a district I had never visited. The buildings were worn and aged, the streets less pristine. The faces of the people we passed were etched with fatigue. My father gestured towards a man selling fruit from a small stand. "Look at him," he said. "He wakes before the sun rises. He works all day without rest, without complaint. He does this to provide for his family." I remained silent, a spectator in this new world. My father then directed my attention to a small shop, where an elderly woman sat hunched over a sewing machine. "She has been working for 40 years, he told me. "She possesses very little, but she works with diligence every single day." I watched the woman, her movements tired but methodical, her focus unbroken. I had never encountered people like this, had never once spared a thought for their existence. My father turned to me, his gaze intense. "Do you see now?" he asked. "Life is not easy for everyone. Some people must struggle every single day. But you, my son, have never worked a single day in your life." A strange sensation coiled in my stomach. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, but no words would come. I looked away, And for the very first time, I felt small. I felt ashamed. Something deep inside me had begun to fracture. We returned to the car. My father drove in silence, leaving me to my thoughts. The images of the fruit vendor and the seamstress were burned into my mind. I had lived a life of such incredible ease, and now, confronted with this stark reality, I felt a profound sense of dissonance. Sometime later, my father stopped the car again. This time, we were in front of a large, imposing building, his office. I had been here before, but only for brief visits to collect money. "Come," he said, getting out of the car. I followed him inside. The office was a hive of activity. People moved quickly, phones rang incessantly, and stacks of paper seemed to be on every surface. He led me to his personal office, sat behind his large desk, and looked at me. "Do you have any idea what I do every day?" he asked. I shrugged. "You work," I said simply. He nodded. "Yes, but do you know how hard I work?" I stayed quiet. He continued, his voice steady. "I wake up early. I make decisions that affect hundreds of people. I solve complex problems. I carry the responsibility of this entire company. And I do all of it for you." My eyes scanned the outer office. I saw employees looking weary, some writing reports, others on tense phone calls, many appearing stressed. I had never considered this side of things. I had only ever seen the result, the money he provided. Never the process, never the sacrifice. A feeling I now recognized as guilt washed over me. Then my father handed me a small notebook. "Starting tomorrow," he declared, "you will work here." I laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "Me? Work?" His expression remained stern. "Yes," he affirmed. "You will start at the very bottom. You will learn." I was stunned. "But I don't need to work," I argued. My father's gaze was unwavering. "You do," he said, "because one day I will not be here. And then what will you do?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I had never considered a life without my father, without his support. I had never thought about the future beyond my immediate comfort. But my choice had been taken from me. My father had decided. Tomorrow, my easy life would end. The next morning, waking up early felt alien. My body protested, accustomed to long hours of sleep. But the obligation to work was a new, unmovable force. I dressed and went downstairs to find my father waiting. He handed me a small bag. "Your lunch," he said. I stared at him, bewildered. "Lunch? Can't I just eat at a restaurant?" He shook his head. "Workers bring their own lunch," he stated flatly. "And today, you are a worker." The drive to the office was different. When we arrived, he didn't lead me to his executive suite. Instead, he took me to a small, crowded room filled with desks and computers. A serious-looking man in glasses approached us. "This is Mr. William," my father said. "You will work under his supervision." And with that, he left. Mr. William gave me a brief, appraising look.
"Come with me," he said, and walked away at a brisk pace.
I hurried to follow. He pointed to a small desk and a chair. "You will check these papers," he instructed, placing a formidable stack of documents in front of me. "Review the numbers, find any mistakes, and mark them." I stared at the paper mountain. "All of them?" I asked. Mr. William nodded. "Yes, and work quickly."
I sat down and began. At first, the task seemed manageable.
But after an hour, a dull ache started in my head. The columns of numbers began to blur together, my eyes growing heavy. The urge to stop was immense, but a glance around the room showed everyone else working in focused silence. No one was resting. No one was chatting. This was a universe away from my old life. This was work. By lunchtime, I was utterly exhausted. I opened the lunch bag my father had given me. It contained simple food, no gourmet dishes, no expensive beverages. I ate in silence, observing the other workers. They consumed their meals rapidly before returning to their desks. There were no long breaks, no light-hearted conversations, just work. A wave of longing for my old life, for my freedom, washed over me. But alongside it, a new feeling emerged: respect. These people labored tirelessly every day, and now I was among them. The afternoon was even more challenging. My back ached from sitting, my hand cramped from writing. I desperately wanted to go home, but I couldn't. Mr. William appeared at my desk, scanned my work, and pointed out several errors. "Do it again," he said, his voice neutral. I sighed, suppressing the urge to argue. I simply nodded and began anew. When the day finally concluded, I felt transformed. I was bone-tired, but something within me had shifted. For the first time, I understood the sheer effort people expended. For the first time, I understood that money was not something that simply appeared. As I walked out of the office, I saw my father waiting. He didn't ask about my day. He just offered a small, knowing smile. And for the first time in my life, I smiled back. Not because life was easy, but because I felt I had, in some small way, earned it. The following day, I woke early once more. My body was sore, my hands stiff. I had never experienced this kind of physical fatigue. I longed to stay in bed, but a new sense of duty propelled me forward. Downstairs, my father was at the table. He looked up at me and gave a single nod. "Good," he said. That was all, but it felt like high praise, a sign of his pride. At the office, Mr. William was waiting. "You were slow yesterday," he stated without preamble. "Today, work faster." I bit back a retort, sat down, and dove back into the sea of numbers. My head throbbed, and my back still ached, but I worked relentlessly. By noon, I had completed the task. Mr. William reviewed my work. He found fewer mistakes this time. "Better," he said. Just one word, but it resonated within me more powerfully than buying something expensive, more satisfyingly than wasting time with friends. It felt real. During my lunch break, I sat with the other workers. They spoke of their families, their struggles, their small joys. I listened, absorbing their stories. I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was a part of their world. In the afternoon, Mr. William gave me an even larger pile of work. "Let's see if you can handle this," he challenged. I wanted to complain, but I refused to. I focused, channeling all my energy into the task. The hours crawled by, but I persevered, driven by a newfound desire to prove myself. At the end of the day, Mr. William looked at my completed work. He didn't smile, but he said, "Not bad." 2 simple words, yet they meant the world to me. My father was waiting outside again. "Tired?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled. "Good," he said. I finally understood. I understood why he had forced me into this life. And for the first time, I didn't want to escape it. I wanted to learn more. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The work was still hard, but I grew stronger. I became faster, more accurate. Mr. Williams' complaints ceased, occasionally replaced by a rare good job, which felt like the most valuable prize I had ever received. I started to understand the true nature of money. I saw my father not just as a source of funds, but as a creator, a problem solver, a leader who bore immense responsibility. My respect for him deepened immeasurably. One evening, he called me into his office. "You have changed," he observed. He was right. I was no longer the same person. "At first," he continued, "you were lazy. You cared for nothing. But now you understand." I nodded in agreement. Then he surprised me. He produced a small key and handed it to me. "This is for your office," he said. I was speechless. "My own office?" I asked. He nodded. "You are ready for more responsibility. You have earned this." I held the key in my hand. It felt small, yet incredibly heavy. Not just a piece of metal, but a symbol of his trust. The next day, I moved into my new office. It was modest, but it was mine. I was no longer just a worker bee. I was learning to lead. It wasn't easy. I made mistakes, but I never gave up. I kept learning, striving to be like the man who had taught me. The most valuable lesson of all. Looking back now, I can only laugh at my former self. The boy who thought life was about ease and money was simple. I was so wrong. Life is about the effort, the struggle, the profound satisfaction of building something with your own 2 hands. My father gave me that lesson, and now I am truly ready for the future. Not because I have money, but because I finally understand how to earn it. If this story of transformation resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing for more inspiring content, and sharing your own experiences with life's most important lessons in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. But understanding how to earn it, I would soon discover, was merely the first step on a mountain I had only just begun to climb. The key to my new office did not unlock a room of comfort. It unlocked a new realm of expectation. The office itself was stark and impersonal. A simple desk, a chair, a computer, and a window that overlooked not the city skyline, but the bustling company warehouse. It was a constant, humming reminder of the operational heart of my father's empire. For the first week, my tasks were an extension of my training with Mr. William, analyzing sales reports, cross-referencing inventory logs, creating forecasts. I worked with the same diligence I had learned, arriving early and staying late. I felt a quiet pride in my work, in the neat columns of data, and the logical conclusions I drew. But I also felt a sense of isolation. I was no longer among the other workers, nor was I in the sphere of my father's executive meetings. I was in a middle ground, a place of learning and observation, and it was lonely. My father seemed to be deliberately giving me space, allowing me to find my own rhythm. Our conversations were brief, focused on work. "How are the third quarter projections?" he would ask. Never, "How are you?" I understood this was a test. He was waiting to see if my new work ethic was a temporary phase, or a permanent transformation. One Monday morning, he called me into his grand office. He didn't ask me to sit. He stood by his window, looking down at the stream of trucks, entering and leaving the facility. "There is a problem in the logistics department," he said, his voice calm but edged with concern. "Our sales are increasing, but our delivery times are getting longer. And our costs are rising. It doesn't make sense." He turned to face me, his eyes sharp and analytical. "The department manager, Arthur, is one of my oldest and most loyal employees. He insists his systems are sound, but the numbers tell a different story." He paused, letting the weight of the situation settle in the room. "I want you to go there. Find out what's happening. Don't just look at the reports. I want you to understand the problem from the inside." A jolt of both fear and excitement shot through me. This was not a training exercise. This was a real problem, a flaw in the engine of the company. And he was trusting me to diagnose it. "Yes, Father," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He gave me a single, firm nod. "Don't command, son," he advised. "Listen, observe, learn. The answer is there, but you won't find it on a spreadsheet." I walked to the logistics department, a sprawling, open-plan office, adjacent to the warehouse. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard and the incessant ringing of phones. I found the manager, Arthur, a man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weary but intelligent face. When I introduced myself, he gave me a polite but distinctly cool smile. "The boss's son," he said, his tone perfectly neutral. Yet I could feel the wall go up between us. "Your father told me you'd be coming to observe." The way he said the word made it sound like I was a child visiting a zoo. He showed me to an empty desk in a corner. "You'll have access to all our routing data and performance metrics. Let us know if you find anything we've missed in the last 20 years. The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable.
For the next few days, I drowned in data. I studied shipping manifests, driver logs, fuel consumption reports,
And warehouse efficiency charts.
I saw the problem my father had described. Costs were up, efficiency was down, but I couldn't see the reason. The numbers were symptoms, not the disease.
The staff in the department treated me with a distant courtesy.
They answered my questions, but offered no insights.
I was an outsider, a suit sent from the top floor.
And they closed ranks around their manager. I felt my frustration mounting. I remembered my father's words. "You won't find it on a spreadsheet." He was right.
The answer wasn't in this office.
The following morning, instead of putting on a suit, I wore simple work pants and a plain shirt. I bypassed the office and went straight to the warehouse entrance. The noise was overwhelming. The roar of forklifts, the clang of metal, the shouts of workers. I found the shift supervisor and explained that I wanted to understand the process. He looked at my clean hands and uncreased clothes with skepticism, but shrugged and told me to stay out of the way. For hours, I just watched. I saw men and women working at an incredible pace, lifting heavy boxes, scanning barcodes, loading trucks with practiced efficiency. There was no laziness here. They were working just as hard as the fruit vendor and the seamstress my father had shown me. I started to notice small things: a forklift that was slow to lift its cargo, a scanning gun that frequently needed to be reset, a long line of workers waiting to use the single industrial wrapping machine. These were tiny moments of friction, small delays that, when multiplied over thousands of packages a day, would become hours of lost time. At lunchtime, I didn't go to a restaurant. I sat in the break room with the warehouse crew. They were hesitant at first, but when I didn't ask questions about work, and instead just listened, they began to relax. They talked about their families, about a leaky roof at home, about a favorite sports team, and eventually they talked about work. They complained about the old forklifts, which they called the turtles. They joked about the temperamental scanners. They spoke of the frustrating new routing software that often sent drivers on illogical routes, wasting time and fuel. This was it. This was the information that wasn't on the spreadsheets. The problem wasn't the people. It was their tools. The systems Arthur insisted were sound had become outdated and inefficient. The company had grown, but the infrastructure supporting its most vital department, they had been left behind. For the rest of the week, I continued my routine. Mornings in the warehouse, afternoons in the office, connecting what I had seen and heard with the data on my screen. The numbers now made perfect sense. The rising fuel costs correlated with the inefficient routes. The increased overtime pay was a direct result of the equipment bottlenecks. That slowed down the entire packing line. I spent the weekend compiling my findings. I didn't just write a report, I built a case. I researched new scanning systems, calculated the return on investment for new forklifts, and found reviews for better logistics software. I prepared a presentation not as an indictment of Arthur and his department, but as a proposal for investment and improvement. On Monday, I presented it first to my father. He listened in complete silence, his face unreadable. He studied my charts and my cost-benefit analyses without a single comment. When I finished, the silence stretched on, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Had I overstepped? Had I failed? Finally, he looked up from my report and met my eyes.
You found the problem, he said simply.
Then he asked a series of sharp, probing questions, testing my assumptions, challenging my conclusions. I answered each one, my confidence growing as I explained the logic behind my proposals. I hadn't just identified problems. I had found practical solutions. He leaned back in his chair. "Good work," he said. The two words were a balm to my frayed nerves. Now comes the hard part. "What's that?" I asked. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Convincing Arthur." I knew he was right. Presenting this to Arthur could be seen as a direct attack on his competence. A young upstart telling a veteran how to do his job. I walked back to the logistics office, my heart pounding. I asked Arthur for a private meeting. We sat in a small, windowless conference room. I didn't start with the problems. I started with the people. "Arthur," I began, "for the past 2 weeks, I've spent most of my time in the warehouse. Your team is one of the hardest working crews I have ever seen." He watched me, his expression guarded. I then laid out my observations, not as criticisms, but as challenges the team was facing. I spoke of the turtles, the faulty scanners, the frustrating software. I could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I was speaking his team's language. I then opened my laptop and showed him the proposal. "I don't think this department needs more pressure," I said. "I think it needs better tools. This isn't my plan. It's a summary of what your own people, they need to do their jobs better." He slowly looked through the slides, reading my notes, examining the figures. He was silent for a long time. I expected resistance, denial, anger. Instead, he looked up at me, and for the first time, the icy wall in his eyes had melted. There was a look of weary acknowledgement. "The forklifts," he said, his voice quiet. "I've been filing requests for new ones for 3 years. Management always said it wasn't in the budget." A wave of understanding washed over me. Arthur wasn't the problem. He was a manager fighting a battle for his people and losing. He wasn't resistant to change. He was worn down by the lack of it. "Let's get it in the budget," I said. I explained that my father had already reviewed the proposal and was waiting for our joint recommendation. For the first time, Arthur looked at me not as the boss's son, but as a potential ally. He wasn't smiling, but the deep-set lines of cynicism around his mouth had softened. "All right," he said, giving a slow nod. "Let's go talk to your father, together." As we walked towards the executive suite, I felt a new kind of accomplishment, one that was deeper than any I had known before. I hadn't just solved a business problem. I had bridged a gap between worlds, between the executive floor and the warehouse floor. I had earned not just a smile from my father, but a nod of respect from a man who had every reason to resent me. The mountain was still tall, but I was finally learning how to climb. The walk to my father's office with Arthur by my side felt worlds away. From the first time I had followed him into the building. Back then, I was a reluctant follower, a shadow dragged into a world I didn't understand. Now, I walked with purpose, my report held not like a school assignment, but like a weapon forged from data and a shield built from understanding. Arthur was silent, but it was a comfortable, collaborative silence. We were a team. When we entered, my father was not behind his desk. When we entered, my father was not behind his desk. He stood by the large window, just as he had before. But this time, he turned to face us immediately. He gestured to the two chairs in front of his desk. We both sat. He remained standing, a deliberate choice that established his authority, but also gave him a vantage point from which to observe us both. He looked at Arthur first. "Arthur," he said, his voice even, "you have seen my son's proposal. Do you agree with his assessment?" This was the critical moment. He was testing not only me, but the alliance I had just forged. He was giving Arthur the power to validate or veto my entire 2 weeks of work. Arthur did not hesitate. He looked my father directly in the eye. "I do," he said, his voice firm with the conviction of a man who knew his department inside and out. "The boy is right. My team is excellent, but their tools are failing them." His report, it doesn't just point out problems. It reflects the conversations I've been having with my crew for years. He listened. My father's gaze shifted to me. A flicker of something I could only interpret as pride passed through his eyes before being replaced by his usual businesslike focus. "And you," he said to me, "you believe this investment will yield the results you've projected? A 12% reduction in operational costs and a 15% improvement in delivery times within 6 months?" "Yes," I said, my own voice clear and steady. "I do." He was silent for what felt like an eternity, his fingers steepled under his chin. He was weighing the risk, the cost, the trust he was placing in me. "Very well," he finally said, moving to his desk and sitting down. "The budget is approved, but on one condition." I held my breath. "This is your project now. You will oversee the procurement, the implementation, and the training. Arthur will be your partner, but the final responsibility for hitting those numbers rests on your shoulders. If this fails, it is your failure." The weight of his words was immense. This was no longer about learning. This was about delivering. Failure would not just mean a loss of money for the company. It would mean a devastating loss of the trust I had just begun to earn. "I understand," I said. "I won't let you down." Over the next 3 months, the logistics department became my entire world. My small office was mostly forgotten as I spent my days on the warehouse floor and in meetings with Arthur. The first step was ordering the new equipment. It wasn't as simple as just buying the most expensive models.
Arthur and I brought in representatives from 3 different forklift manufacturers and had the warehouse crew test the machines themselves. We listened to their feedback, to the drivers who spoke of turning radius and lift capacity, and the mechanics who talked about ease of maintenance. We chose the machines they recommended, not the ones with the flashiest brochures. It was a small thing, but it sent a powerful message. Their opinions mattered. We did the same with the software, running simulations and getting input from the dispatchers who would use it every day. When the new equipment began to arrive, a palpable sense of excitement spread through the warehouse. The day the new forklifts were delivered, gleaming and powerful, the crew gathered around them like they were newborn children. I saw men who rarely smiled break into wide grins. This wasn't just new equipment. It was a sign that they were seen, that they were valued. But the implementation was the true test. We couldn't just shut down the entire operation. We had to phase in the new systems while keeping tens of thousands, dozens of packages moving every single day. The first week was chaotic. The new software had bugs the simulations hadn't caught. A driver was sent 20 miles in the wrong direction. An entire pallet of goods was misscanned and temporarily lost. The stress was immense. The old me would have panicked, would have blamed the software company, or perhaps even the workers. But the new me remembered my father's advice: listen, observe, learn. I called a meeting with the entire night shift, the ones who had faced the worst of the glitches. I didn't give a speech. I brought a whiteboard and a box of donuts and simply asked, "What went wrong, and how can we make it better?" At first, they were hesitant. But then, one of the older drivers, a man named Carlos, who had barely said 2 words to me before, walked up to the whiteboard. He explained how the old system, for all its flaws, had a manual override that allowed for common-sense route corrections. The new, automated system had taken that flexibility away. He sketched out a simple change to the user interface that would restore that critical function. It was brilliant. It was a solution born from 20 years of experience, not from a programmer's code. We sent the suggestion to the software company, and they implemented a patch within 48 hours. It worked perfectly. That was the turning point. I was no longer just the boss's son overseeing a project. I was a partner in problem solving. I learned to trust the expertise of the people on the floor, and in turn, they began to trust me. Arthur was my guide through it all, his quiet wisdom and deep knowledge of his team proving invaluable. He taught me how to schedule training without crippling the workflow, how to read the subtle signs of crew fatigue, and when to push and when to simply provide support. We worked side by side, our initial wariness replaced by a solid, mutual respect. Gradually, the chaos subsided and was replaced by a new, more powerful rhythm. The warehouse hummed with the quiet efficiency of the new machinery. The frantic shouting was replaced by the calm beeps of functioning scanners. The delivery trucks left on time, every time. I continued to track the numbers.
After 1 month, costs were down by 4%. After 3, they were down by 9. By the end of the 5th month, we had surpassed our goal, achieving a 14% reduction in operational costs. Delivery times had improved by nearly 20%. I compiled the final report, the charts and graphs painting a clear picture of success. But the real proof wasn't on the paper. It was in the atmosphere of the department. It was in the easy way the workers would now greet me, in the way Arthur would discuss a problem with me as an equal. I had not just installed new machines, I had helped restore morale and dignity to a department that had been neglected for too long. The day I presented the final report to my father, Arthur came with me. My father reviewed the numbers with his usual meticulous care. He asked a few clarifying questions, but his demeanor was different. The skepticism was gone. When he finished, he didn't look at me. He looked at Arthur. "Are you satisfied with the results, Arthur?" he asked. Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "More than satisfied," he replied. "Your son did good work. He's a natural leader. He just needed to get his hands dirty to find it." My father then turned to me. He stood up, walked around his desk, and extended his hand. I stood and shook it. His grip was firm, a gesture of professional respect from one man to another. It meant more to me than any praise. "You have done well," he said. "You took responsibility. You listened to your team. And you delivered on your promise. You have earned this success." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a profound sense of accomplishment that was entirely new. This feeling was 1,000 times more satisfying than buying a new car or taking a lavish vacation. This was real. I had built something. But as I basked in the moment, my father's expression shifted. The look of the proud father was replaced by the look of the CEO. "This project was a test," he said, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. "And you have passed, which is why I have a new assignment for you." He gestured for me to sit again, his face now a mask of gravity. "Our Northern Manufacturing Division," he began, "is failing. Production is down, employee turnover is at an all-time high, and it has been losing money for 3 consecutive quarters. We are 6 months away from having to shut it down and lay off over 500 people." He let the information sink in, the numbers representing not just profits and losses, but the livelihoods of hundreds of families. My success with the logistics department suddenly felt small, like a simple training exercise before a great war. "I am putting you in charge of turning it around," he stated, his words landing like stones. "You will move there next month. You will have full operational control. Fix it or shut it down. The choice and the consequences will be yours." I stared at him, the elation of my recent victory evaporating into a cold dread. This wasn't a department. It was an entire division. It wasn't about improving efficiency. It was about saving a part of the company from complete collapse. He wasn't just giving me more responsibility. He was handing me an anchor
and telling me to teach it how to swim.
The drive north was a long, silent journey into a landscape of doubt. With every mile that passed, the city I knew, a world of polished glass.
An effortless convenience receded in my rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and then, eventually, by the gray, stoic architecture of an old industrial town.
The air itself seemed heavier here, tinged with the metallic scent of industry
and the palpable weight of uncertainty. The factory was a sprawling beast of brick and steel, stained with the soot of 100 years of production.
A banner near the gate announced 120 days without an accident.
But the number had been crudely painted over a much smaller one,
a detail that spoke volumes. Inside, the atmosphere was even more grim.
The rhythmic clang and hiss of machinery couldn't mask the oppressive silence
of the workers.
They moved like ghosts in their own workplace, their faces etched with a deep, weary resignation. No one met my eye.
I was an alien, a suit from corporate, and they saw me
not as a savior, but as an undertaker, here to sign the death certificate of their livelihoods. My first meeting with the senior staff was a masterclass in passive resistance. The plant manager, a man named Henderson, had the defeated posture of a general who had already surrendered. He presented charts that showed a slow, inevitable decline, speaking in a monotone that betrayed a complete lack of hope. The union representative, a fiery woman named Maria, eyed me with open hostility, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We've seen your type before," she said,
her voice cutting through the stale air of the conference room.
"You'll come in, make a few cosmetic changes, write a report about unavoidable market forces, and then 1,000 people. Because it's not just the 500 workers, it's their families.
Will be out on the street."
Her words stung because I knew, deep down, that the old me would have done exactly that. But I was not the old me. I remembered Arthur. I remembered the warehouse crew. And I remembered my father's words, "You won't find it on a spreadsheet." The next morning, I arrived at the factory not in a suit, but in the same simple work clothes I had worn in the warehouse. I found Henderson in his office. "I want to work a shift on the line," I told him. He stared at me as if I had grown a second head. "That's highly irregular," he stammered. "I don't want to be an observer," I insisted. "I need to understand." He reluctantly assigned me to the care of a veteran foreman, a grizzled man named Frank, who looked at my clean hands with undisguised contempt. He put me on the most basic task, packing finished components into boxes. The work was mind-numbingly repetitive and physically demanding. The noise was a constant, deafening roar. The air was thick with the smell of hot oil and metal dust. After 2 hours, my back was screaming in protest, and my hands were raw. But I didn't complain. I just worked, keeping my head down, watching and listening. For the first week, no one spoke to me. I was an unwelcome presence,
a constant reminder of their precarious future. I ate my lunch alone in the corner of the break room. The silence around me, a tangible wall. But I was persistent. I showed up early every day. I stayed late to help clean. I learned the names of the people on my line. And slowly, infinitesimally, the ice began to thaw. It started with Frank. One afternoon, a piece of machinery down the line jammed, a common occurrence. Instead of waiting for maintenance, Frank moved with practiced ease, using a long metal rod to clear the blockage. It was a dangerous, makeshift solution. "Why isn't there an automatic shutoff?" I asked him later. He just grunted. "Costs money. They cut the maintenance budget to the bone years ago. We're lucky the whole place hasn't burned down." That was the first crack in the wall. Over the next few weeks, more stories trickled out. I learned that the high turnover wasn't just about low wages, it was about safety. There had been a series of small accidents, injuries that were officially logged as operator error, but were really caused by aging, poorly maintained equipment. The previous management had created a culture of fear, where reporting a safety concern could get you labeled as a troublemaker. They had incentivized speed over safety, quantity over quality, leading to a product that was increasingly flawed and a workforce that was increasingly injured and demoralized. The problem wasn't the people, it was the entire system. They were being asked to win a race in a car with 3 flat tires and a faulty engine, and then being blamed when they lost. The turning point came during a torrential rainstorm. A section of the old factory roof, which I later learned had been on the repair list for 5 years, finally gave way. Water poured onto the factory floor, dangerously close to a bank of high-voltage machinery. Panic started to spread. Henderson was frozen in his office, paralyzed by procedure. I didn't think. I grabbed Frank and Maria and we organized the workers, using empty pallets to build a makeshift barrier to divert the water. While others shut down the power, we worked for an hour, soaked to the bone, side by side, until the immediate danger was past. In the aftermath, standing in the dark, silent factory, something had shifted. I was no longer the suit from corporate. I was just one of them, covered in the same grime and rainwater. Maria looked at me, her usual hostility gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "Okay," she said quietly. "What's your real plan?" I spent the next 72 hours without sleep, locked in my office with Frank, Maria, and a handful of other trusted workers. We tore apart every process, every budget line, every single assumption. We built a new plan from the ground up. It wasn't about cost-cutting, it was about investment. It called for a complete overhaul of the most critical machinery. A new preventative maintenance program, a reinstated safety committee with real authority, and a bonus structure that rewarded quality and safety, not just speed. It was a radical, expensive plan. The most difficult meeting of my life was not with a hostile union, but with my own father. I flew back to the city and stood before him, not as his son, but as the acting head of his Northern Division. I didn't plead. I presented a business case, backed by hard data, and the first-hand accounts of his employees. I showed him the cost of failure, the lawsuits from injuries, the lost contracts from poor quality, the constant expense of hiring and training new people. Then I showed him the cost of the investment and the projected path back to profitability. This isn't a bailout, I concluded. This is a strategic investment in our most important asset, our people. Give me the tools, and we will turn this around. Refuse, and you should shut it down tomorrow. Because the way things are is unsustainable, and it is wrong. He listened in silence, his eyes never leaving mine. He interrogated every number, every projection. He was testing me, pushing me, making sure this wasn't youthful idealism, but a sound strategy. Finally, he leaned back. "This is the biggest gamble this company has ever taken," he said. He paused, and for a moment I thought he would refuse. "The request is approved. Don't prove me wrong." The day I returned to the factory and announced the plan, to the entire workforce in the main assembly hall, the silence was absolute. They listened with skepticism born of years of broken promises. But then, in the weeks that followed, the words became action. The contractors arrived to fix the roof. The brand new stamping presses were delivered. The new safety training began. The new safety training began. Hope, an emotion that had been absent for so long, slowly began to return to the factory floor. The change wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Not just a factory, but trust. But it worked. Accidents dropped to zero. Product quality soared. Within 6 months, we had landed a major new contract. Our first in 3 years. We weren't just surviving, we were growing. The division was profitable for the first time in half a decade. I stayed in that northern town for 2 more years, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It had become my home. My father never had to tell me my job was done. I knew it one afternoon when I was walking the factory floor. The machines hummed with a healthy, powerful rhythm. The workers laughed and joked as they worked with practiced, safe efficiency. Frank clapped me on the shoulder as I passed, and Maria gave me a quick, approving nod from across the room. I had not just saved their jobs, we had built something together, something strong and lasting. I look back now at the boy I once was, the one who believed that life was meant to be easy, and I feel a profound sense of pity for him. He had everything, but he understood nothing. He sought comfort, but he never knew the deep, unshakable satisfaction of accomplishment. My father gave me many gifts in my life, but the greatest one was not his money. It was the chance to struggle, to fail, to learn, and finally, to build something meaningful with my own 2 hands. He taught me that the true value of a life is not in what you are given, but in what you earn.
And that is a lesson I will carry with me forever.